Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Taylor, and I am on the staff here at ASALH. We do want to encourage you, if you would like to participate in the conversation, you can unmute yourself as well. You can come on screen. Thank you all for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited. I'm honored to be here. It's nice to see your names. Hopefully, you will have some questions at the end of the talk here. But I'm very happy to be here. I'm in Northern Ireland right now, so it is 11 o'clock p.m. where I am. So hopefully, I will, not babble on too much unnecessarily, but I will be talking to you about my new book, Generations of Freedom, Gender Movement and Violence in Natchez, Mississippi, from 1779 to 1865. It just came out at the end of March, so it's still fairly new. And the idea of writing a book is always somewhat of a daunting kind of prospect. You let it out there into the world, and luckily in this day and age, I feel very fortunate that I was able to put together, along with one of my graduate students, a website to add some more features about the people that I look at, which is the free Black community living in Natchez through that time period. And just to tell you a little bit about Natchez itself, it was founded in the early 1700s, and it went through several different governances, international governances. It was initially founded as part of French Louisiana, known as the Natchez District, and it included areas around Natchez, Mississippi, which is down in the southwest corner of Mississippi. And then the British took it in the mid part of the 1700s, 1763 to 1779, and then the Spanish had it, and then the Americans finally acquired the territory in 1795. So it went through several different kinds of iterations, and there were free Black people from the earliest times. Under the French, there were some wars that were fought by the French against Native Americans who had occupied that area for hundreds, thousands of years. And so some enslaved Africans chose to fight on the side of the French and ended up securing their freedom during that time. And so from that time until the period that I am looking at these issues of the community, of family dynamics, of gender dynamics, of property ownership, of violence that was enacted upon people. And what I really like to emphasize is that, most people think that for the African American presence, that it really goes back to 1619. But I do like to emphasize that for as long as there was European exploration of the Americas, starting with the Spanish and Christopher Columbus, there were people of African descent that were present. Even in the 1500s in North America, people that were free and people that were enslaved that were part of that, that project of exploration, of looking at these kinds of territories, of interfacing with Native Americans and that kind of thing. So that's a really important part for me, is telling the story of freedom right alongside the story of enslavement, and how a lot of times they are these parallel experiences, but they do intersect in really significant ways. And so part of what I talk about in my book is how there were these permeable boundaries between freedom and enslavement. And I was really talking about two different generations that I saw. And, if any of you have read the work of Ira Berlin, these ideas were inspired by, my admiration of his scholarship throughout the years. But he looks at different generations of Africans that came from Africa, the charter generation, and the later generations that followed. And I was looking at that kind of in reverse. The first generation of people to obtain their freedom in Natchez, which I call the foundational generation. So these are people who were born into slavery, who were socialized into slavery. Sometimes it was, a multi-generational group. So say an enslaved woman who was sexually exploited by her enslaver and had children. And sometimes in one manumission action, they would all be freed together. So I was looking at that as one generation. And then the generations that followed, those who were born into freedom, I call the conditional generations. But whatever generation one happened to be born in at that time, really all people were subject to maintaining their freedom. And free Black people, what I really like to emphasize is survival stories, that there are so many different kinds of strategies that people put together to really maintain their freedom and to make sure that they and their family members did not fall back into slavery, because re-enslavement could happen for a number of different offenses: not paying one's taxes, being accused of a crime. There were some stories or some instances of people being kidnapped and enslaved unlawfully. So, they had to really engage in a lot of things, procuring property a lot of times, which would buttress them against any vulnerabilities and that kind of thing. And really focusing on relationships with one another as a community of free people, and also trying to form relationships with white people that were in the area. So maintaining good relationships with former enslavers so that they could have somebody to vouch for them, in front of the police, because there were time periods within this era where people looked very suspiciously at free Black people. Sometimes they were accused of helping people run away, sometimes fomenting rebellion among the enslaved. And so there were, what one free Black man, William Johnson, who he had 3 barber shops in Natchez. And I don't know if any of you have ever visited Natchez, but his house, it's called the William Johnson House. I actually argue that, it should be called the Amy Johnson House, his mother, because in my view, she was really instrumental to him and his sister getting their freedom. But their house is available. It's been turned into a national park historical museum. And he calls it the witch hunts that happened, and one in particular in 1841, where free Black people had to go before the police board and really have people vouch for their good character. They had to prove that they were industrious and not causing trouble and that kind of thing in town. So it was a multi-layered spectrum of strategies that people had to come up with in order to maintain their freedom. So that's a little snippet of what I do in the book. And I would really encourage you, if you do have time, to look around this website that, like I said, my student really helped me create. I am a 18th and 19th century historian. Technology is not always my friend. So luckily for me, he was very adept with it. And so there's a lot of features on here, and I'll just show you a couple of them. So one, obviously this project is all about the people. And just to tell you a little snippet again about Natchez, Mississippi had one of the smallest populations of free Black people within the entire South, second only to Arkansas, which was settled later and more sparsely. So, in 1860, right at the height of, right on the eve before the Civil War, Mississippi had over 400,000 enslaved people in the state, but they only had a population of 775, which is a tiny number. And in Natchez, that number was 225. So we're talking about a very small community. But it's all about stories. And so under this tab, there are 5 featured people. So this is actually Ann Battles Johnson, who was married to William Johnson, who I mentioned, owned 3 barber shops and a few businesses. So this is just, telling about her life. I actually wrote this piece on her. It was in the African American National Biography project that came out in 2008. And so just, telling these snippets of stories about some of the people. Have graduate students who will be working with me and creating some more of these types of stories. But this is a really important part of it to me, is just really documenting the people that we're talking about. So from 1779 to 1865, there were over 1,000 free Black people that either lived in Natchez, some of them were passing through. There were a number of freedom suits that I looked at where people sometimes were kidnapped and sold into slavery in the Natchez area. And so they managed to get representation, legal representation, and come before the courts and argue their case. And they were often able to produce witnesses from wherever it was that they were taken from and kidnapped from. And some of the stories end positively, where their freedom becomes established, and they often end up leaving Natchez and going back to their home communities. And then you do have a permanent community of people that remain in Natchez. So this is another feature of the website. This is really the documents about the people. And I'm sorry, I was telling Ms. Taylor before we started, okay, it looks like it's cooperating. Sometimes it can be a little slow, but this is part of my research, which began in 1996. So this has been a very long project for me. I started as a master's student at Michigan State, and it went through a couple of different, initially I was just looking at Black women, free Black women who owned property in Natchez, and then it became a community study. But I did create what I call the index of free individuals and families, and I alphabetized it. So starting with this man named Aaron, who his last name was not given, but this is his emancipation document. So I transcribed and, put it all in here. And then Abigail, same situation. She did not have, her surname was not given. But then a man named Peyton Abbey, who was actually picked up as a runaway and jailed, and nobody was coming forward to prove that he was actually a free man. But eventually he did prove that he was free, but he had to pay for the fees, the jailing fees. And so he had to indenture himself for a number of years in order to pay that off. But you can see some of these documents give really amazing detail about, his age. It says he was a small Black man, about 21 years old, 5 feet 4 1/4 inches high, a scar on the little finger of his left hand, and, so on and so on. So that's part of the website. I think I'm probably coming very near to the end of my 15-minute presentation. So I do want to open it up and just have a bit of a conversation with you all if you're interested. If there's any questions that I can take or any comments, anything that you'd like to add, I would be very happy.
Ms. Carla Strand, would you like to unmute yourself? Because we do have 2 questions, one question from Ms. Strand and one question from Marilyn Pinson. Thank you. Hi.
Hi there. I can't see myself, so I don't know what what's showing on my camera right now.
Lots and lots of books.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a librarian, so that works. Hi there. Sorry, I'm coming to you from land grabbing UW-Madison, home of the Potawatomi and Ho-Chunk. And I'm wondering if there are similar projects that you know about in other states. Like, do you know of any other scholars in other states or other areas doing this sort of work?
That's a great question, and I will show one more tab because this is another feature of the website that my student, his child, that the resources page, it was really important that I did put up, because there's a lot of work that's been done on free Black people from the earliest times. And actually, Carter G. Woodson looked at Black slave owners in the year 1830 and wrote a pretty famous, well-known study on that. But I did, put some of the work that's specific to Natchez that's been done, and then just in general of free Black people. But then, more appropriate to your question, it links to some websites that focus on this website right here. So I was a student, I have 3 degrees from Michigan State University, and I'm involved with the project that is run out of Michigan State through Matrix, the Enslaved Project. And the database that I created with my book is going to be published on their platform. So they are very interested in getting these, from all over the world, these documents of enslaved people, of free Black people, and that kind of thing. So there are a number of different websites that I would really encourage you to explore. This is not an exhaustive list. There is a lot that's been done out there. I would say one of the inspirations for me was the work of Gwendolyn Nidlow Hall with her work on colonial Louisiana. And she has a database that I think it's around 140,000 enslaved and free people of color that are included in that database. And exploring her database is really, it's a pretty fascinating experience, because you can search for a number of different kinds of factors, and you look like you're already familiar with it. But yeah, what I would really like to do eventually is link up with other scholars that do work on Natchez and on the lower Mississippi Valley. There's one woman that I do list in the resources. Sorry, I'm going to scroll through this really quickly, but Kimberly Welch, she just came out with a book a couple of years ago, Black Litigants in the Antebellum American South, and she looks at the Natchez district. I looked really specifically at the city of Natchez and the county, Adams County, Mississippi, but she looks at some of the surrounding counties, what was part of the original Natchez district under the French. And she went in and really did a lot of research on court cases. So it would be great to collaborate and, put more sources out there on the website. So that's my hope one of these days. But thank you so much for the question. I really hope that I answered it fully.
There is one more question. Have you found descendants who were able to learn from your work?
I'm sorry, have I found what? Sorry.
Descendants who were able to learn from your work?
That is such a great question. So I've got one story that I think is really interesting, because my dissertation on this topic, which is basically what my book grew out of, my dissertation through Michigan State. When I graduated, I signed the paperwork saying that I didn't want the dissertation to be released. But then about a year after I graduated and I was working outside of Atlanta at Georgia Gwinnett College, I got an email from somebody who said that she was a descendant of one of the families. And it's actually, I'm going to put the book back up, because the cover photo is this family, the Barland family. And she said that her husband was actually a descendant of this family, and that they were doing genealogical work, and that they came across my dissertation. So I was horrified that the dissertation had been released without my permission, but I was really interested in what she was telling me, because many of Natchez's free Black community, they were mixed heritage. They were descendants of Europeans, as well as Africans, as well as some Native Americans. And the Barland family, Elizabeth, who became known as Elizabeth Barland, she was purchased from a man named James Eiler by a Scottish man named William Barland. So William purchased Elizabeth and their 4 children from James Eiler, and he emancipated the 5 of them on the same day that he purchased them. And then they went on to have 8 more children together. And he ended up leaving all of his property to Elizabeth and their children.